Welcome to Moonlit Tales of Mystery and Suspense. Tonight, we journey to the golden English countryside, where the last garden party of summer conceals passions darker than the approaching autumn. Hercule Poirot and his faithful companion, Captain Hastings, find themselves guests at Summerfield House, where laughter echoes across manicured lawns and champagne flows like water. But beneath the festive surface, old wounds fester and new betrayals take root. Join us for The Last Day of Summer, a tale of love turned bitter, loyalty transformed to hatred, and the terrible price of promises broken. Crafted in homage to the masterful Agatha Christie, whose genius we honor, though this mystery unfolds on our own terms. Before we begin, tell us in the comments. Where are you joining us from tonight? Your presence illuminates our journey through these shadowed mysteries. Now, let the story unfold. Chapter 1. The Golden Afternoon. I have often observed that the most perfect days carry within them the seeds of tragedy. It is as though fate, in her capricious wisdom, demands a price for such beauty, and collects it with interest. The 31st of August, 1936, dawned with precisely the sort of crystalline loveliness that makes one ache for its passing. The sky stretched overhead in an unbroken dome of forget-me-not blue, and the gardens of Summerfield House blazed with the final, desperate glory of summer roses. My friend Hercule Poirot and I had arrived the previous evening at the invitation of Sir Marcus Ashworth, whose acquaintance Poirot had made some months earlier, during a rather delicate matter involving a forged Vermeer. Sir Marcus had been effusive in his gratitude and insistent that we attend his annual end-of-summer garden party, an event that, he assured us, was the highlight of the Hampshire social calendar. "You will come, Monsieur Poirot," Sir Marcus had written. "I simply will not accept refusal. The gardens are magnificent, the champagne exceptional, and the company, well, the company is invariably interesting. One never knows what dramas may unfold when families gather." Standing now on the terrace overlooking the south lawn, I understood his pride. Summerfield House was a Georgian gem, its honey-colored stone glowing warmly in the afternoon light. The gardens descended in a series of terraces toward a small lake, its surface mirror-still and dotted with water lilies. A white gazebo perched at the water's edge, wreathed in climbing roses, and scattered across the lawns, guests in summer finery drifted like bright butterflies among the flower beds. Beside me, Poirot surveyed the scene with rather less enthusiasm. His patent leather shoes, immaculate as always, had already suffered an unfortunate encounter with the gravel path, and he dabbed at his forehead with a silk handkerchief. "It is excessively warm, Hastings," he announced. "The English, they do not understand that the sun, she is not always a friend. In Belgium, we would take the shade during such hours." "Nonsense, Poirot. It's glorious. Look at that sky." "I have looked, mon ami. I have seen sufficient sky. What I require is a comfortable chair and perhaps a citron pressé." He paused, his keen eyes sweeping the assembled guests. "Though I confess, the human landscape here, that is more interesting than the botanical one." I followed his gaze. Near the rose arbor, a young woman in a cream-colored dress stood in animated conversation with a tall, dark-haired man, whose gestures grew increasingly emphatic. As I watched, the woman laid a restraining hand on his arm, and he shook it off with visible irritation. "That is Geoffrey Ashworth," I said, recognizing him from our brief introduction the previous evening. "Sir Marcus's nephew. The young lady, I believe, is Mrs. Rosalind Crane, a widow, recently moved to the district." Ah, Poirot's mustache twitched. And they discuss, perhaps, the weather? The prospects for the hunting season? None. I think not. Observe the rigidity of the shoulders, the manner in which he avoids her eyes. There is history there, Hastings, and not, I suspect, a pleasant one. Before I could reply, our host appeared at my elbow, resplendent in a cream linen suit that emphasized his florid complexion and silver hair. Sir Marcus Ashworth was a man of 62 who carried himself like one a decade younger, vigorous, commanding, accustomed to having his way in all things. "Gentlemen, I trust you're enjoying yourselves?" His voice boomed across the terrace. "Marvelous day for it, simply marvelous. The gardens have never looked better. I must take you to see the new water feature before the light goes. Had it installed last spring, cost a fortune, but worth every penny." "You are too kind, Sir Marcus," Poirot murmured. "The grounds are indeed spectacular." "Aren't they just?" Sir Marcus beamed. "Of course, one doesn't maintain an estate like this alone. Takes a village, as they say. Speaking of which," he waved imperiously, and a woman detached herself from a nearby group, approaching with quiet efficiency. She was perhaps 40, with brown hair streaked with gray and pulled back in an unforgiving style that did nothing for her pleasant, unremarkable features. Her dress was serviceable navy blue, and she carried a leather portfolio pressed against her chest like armor. "This is Miss Vance," Sir Marcus announced. "My secretary, absolutely indispensable. Couldn't manage without her. Handles everything from correspondence to household accounts. Been with me 15 years now, haven't you, Eleanor?" 16 in October, Sir Marcus. Her voice was low and colorless. "Is it really? How time flies." He dismissed her with a casual wave. "Eleanor, do see that Monsieur Poirot and Captain Hastings have everything they need. Fresh drinks, chairs in the shade, whatever they require." "Of course, Sir Marcus." I watched Miss Vance's face as she received these instructions. Her expression remained perfectly neutral, but something flickered in her eyes, there and gone so quickly I might have imagined it. Resentment? Resignation? I could not say. "She seems very capable," I remarked as Sir Marcus strode off to greet newly arriving guests. Poirot tilted his head, regarding Miss Vance's retreating figure with interest. "Capable, yes. And something more, I think. You observed, Hastings, how she corrected him on the years of her service? Well, naturally she would know. And he did not. 16 years she gives to this man, and he cannot remember the number." Poirot tapped his temple. "The little details, they tell us much about the nature of relationships, non?" The afternoon wore on in a pleasant blur of champagne and strawberries, idle conversation and croquet. I found myself drawn into a match with Lady Daphne Merriweather, Sir Marcus's elder sister, a formidable woman in her late 60s, whose competitive spirit belied her gray hair and lace collar. "You play well, Captain Hastings," she observed, lining up her shot with military precision. "Were you a sporting man before the war?" "I dabbled, Lady Daphne, cricket mostly." "Ah." She struck the ball cleanly, sending it through the hoop. "My husband was a cricketer, fine bowler. Dead now, of course, the influenza in 19. Left me comfortably provided for, at least, unlike some." Her gaze drifted toward Geoffrey Ashworth, who had retreated to the terrace with a drink and a sullen expression. "Mr. Ashworth seems out of sorts today," I ventured. Lady Daphne's lips thinned. "Geoffrey is always out of sorts, Has been ever since Marcus made it clear he wouldn't be getting an early inheritance. Expensive habits, that young man. Cambridge dropout, failed business ventures, gambling debts, the usual tedious catalog. Marcus keeps him on a tight leash, doles out an allowance like one feeds a troublesome dog. She paused, her mallet suspended mid-swing. They had words this morning, quite loud ones. The servants will be gossiping for weeks. Words about what, if I may ask? Money, Captain Hastings. It's always about money. She completed her shot with unnecessary force. Geoffrey wanted a larger advance against his inheritance. Marcus refused. There was shouting, threats, the usual theatrics. Geoffrey swore he'd make Marcus sorry. Empty bluster, of course. The boy hasn't the spine for anything more. I relayed this information to Poirot over tea, which he had finally obtained along with a shaded bench overlooking the lake. He listened with his eyes half closed, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. So the nephew, he threatens the uncle, he murmured. And the uncle, he controls the money. A classic configuration, Hastings. Almost too classic, one might say. You think there might be trouble? I think, mon ami, that wherever there is money, there is trouble. It is the way of the world. He sipped his tea. Chamomile, he had specified firmly, and let his gaze wander across the guests. But observe, see how the players move upon this beautiful stage. The nephew broods, the sister watches, and there, see her? The young widow. She approaches our host with a smile that is perhaps a shade too bright. Indeed, Mrs. Rosalind Crane had materialized at Sir Marcus's elbow, laughing at something he said with what struck me as excessive enthusiasm. She was remarkably pretty, dark hair, luminous eyes, a figure that her pale green dress displayed to considerable advantage. Sir Marcus appeared entirely captivated. They make a handsome couple, I observed. They make a spectacle, Poirot corrected. And see who watches them. I followed his subtle nod. Miss Vance stood partially concealed by a trellis of climbing roses, her portfolio clutched to her chest, her eyes fixed on Sir Marcus and Mrs. Crane. Her face remained expressionless, but her knuckles had whitened around the leather binding. The secretary? I frowned. Surely she can't. I mean, Sir Marcus would never... Never what, Hastings? Never notice a woman who has devoted 16 years to his service? Never offer hope where none should exist? Never. He paused, a shadow crossing his features. The heart, it is a complicated organ, mon ami. It does not always beat in sensible directions. The afternoon shadows lengthened across the lawn, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Servants began lighting lanterns along the garden paths, their flames flickering like earthbound stars. The party, I realized, had taken on a different quality as evening approached, more intimate, more charged. Sir Marcus excused himself from Mrs. Crane's company and retreated to the gazebo, a crystal glass in hand. I watched him settle onto the cushioned bench within, his face momentarily unguarded. In that instant, stripped of his bonhomie, he looked older, tired, perhaps even troubled. Miss Vance approached him with a small silver tray bearing a medicine bottle and a glass. I saw them exchange words, brief, businesslike. She poured something into his glass, stirred it, handed it to him. He drank without looking at her, waving her away with a gesture that seemed almost contemptuous. His afternoon tonic, Lady Daphne remarked, appearing at my elbow. Heart trouble, apparently. The doctor insists on some dreadful concoction. Marcus takes it like clockwork, 3 o'clock every afternoon. Eleanor sees to it. Miss Vance administers his medication, has done for years, measures it out, mixes it, the whole business. Devoted to his welfare, that woman. Sometimes I think she's the only one in this house who genuinely cares whether my brother lives or dies. The clock in the church tower beyond the estate walls chimed 3. The sound drifted across the gardens like a benediction, or perhaps a warning. In 8 hours, Sir Marcus Ashworth would be dead. But in that golden moment, with the summer sun warming our faces and the champagne flowing freely, none of us could have guessed what darkness the final day of summer would bring. Chapter 2. When the music stopped. The evening descended upon Summerfield House like a velvet curtain, soft and heavy with the promise of autumn. Lanterns now dotted the gardens in constellations of amber light, and a string quartet had set up on the lower terrace, their music drifting across the lawns in strains of Vivaldi. I had changed for dinner, a necessity, Lady Daphne had informed me crisply, as the garden party transformed into something more formal as darkness fell. Now, resplendent in evening dress, I stood on the terrace with a whiskey in hand, watching the guests mill about in their finery like exotic birds. Poirot appeared beside me, immaculate as always in his perfectly pressed dinner jacket. His patent leather shoes gleamed in the lantern light, and his mustache had been waxed to particularly magnificent points. "You look pleased with yourself," I observed. "I am always pleased when I am properly dressed, Hastings. It is a matter of self-respect." He accepted a glass of mineral water from a passing servant and surveyed the scene. "But I confess, I am also intrigued. This household, it bubbles like a pot upon the stove. One feels that at any moment it may boil over." "You're being dramatic, Poirot." "Perhaps." His eyes narrowed. "And yet, observe our host." Sir Marcus had emerged onto the terrace, but the vigorous man of the afternoon had been replaced by someone altogether different. He moved slowly, one hand pressed to his temple, his florid complexion now waxy and pale. As I watched, he stumbled slightly, catching himself on the balustrade. "He doesn't look well," I said, frowning. "No, he does not." Poirot set down his glass. "See how he squints against the lantern light, though it is not bright, and his hand, it trembles as he reaches for his champagne." Indeed, Sir Marcus's hand shook visibly as he lifted his glass. He took a long swallow, grimacing as though the champagne tasted of something bitter. Dr. Harold Pentworth, a stout gentleman with a gray beard and kind eyes, approached him with evident concern. "Marcus, old boy, you look frightful," I heard the doctor say. "Perhaps you should sit down, rest a bit." "Nonsense, Harold." Sir Marcus's voice was strained. "Bit of a headache, that's all. Probably the sun. I was out too long this afternoon. I'll be right as rain after dinner." "At least let me check your pulse." "I said I'm fine." Sir Marcus's snap drew startled glances from nearby guests. He moderated his tone with visible effort. "Forgive me, old friend. I didn't mean to bark, just feeling rather off. Perhaps I'll take a turn by the lake. The cool air might help." He set down his champagne glass and made his way down the terrace steps, moving with the careful deliberation of a man uncertain of his own footing. I watched him cross the lawn toward the gazebo, his white dinner jacket ghostly in the gathering dusk. "Should someone go with him?" I asked. Poirot shook his head slowly. "He wishes to be alone, I think, and besides," he gestured toward the terrace doors, "dinner is about to be announced. The gong sounded moments later, its deep resonance summoning the guests indoors. I lingered a moment, watching Sir Marcus's retreating figure. He had reached the gazebo now and was lowering himself onto the bench within, one hand still pressed to his head. "Coming, Hastings?" Lady Daphne's voice was crisp. "One doesn't keep cook waiting. She's prepared a magnificent meal, and it will spoil if we dawdle." I followed the others inside, but something nagged at me, a sense of wrongness I couldn't quite identify. The last image I had of Sir Marcus was his silhouette in the gazebo, slumped against the latticed wall, utterly still. Dinner was an elaborate affair, though the empty chair at the head of the table cast a pall over the proceedings. Lady Daphne had taken command, directing servants and conversation with equal authority, but the absence of our host was impossible to ignore. "Marcus will join us shortly," she assured the guests, her smile a fraction too bright. "He's simply taking the air. The heat rather overwhelmed him today." Geoffrey Ashworth snorted into his wine. "The heat? Yes, I'm sure that's what it is." His tone dripped with insinuation. "Geoffrey." Lady Daphne's voice could have cut glass. "That's quite enough." "Is it? We all know Uncle Marcus has been overexerting himself lately." His gaze slid meaningfully toward Mrs. Rosalind Crane, who flushed and looked away. "Perhaps the strain is finally catching up with him." The silence that followed was excruciating. I saw Miss Vance's hand tighten around her water glass, her face carefully blank. Dr. Pentworth cleared his throat uncomfortably. Mrs. Crane studied her plate with fierce concentration. Poirot, seated beside me, observed it all with bright, watchful eyes. "The nephew," he murmured. "He has the subtlety of a charging bull." "He's drunk," I muttered back, "and bitter, a dangerous combination." "Indeed, but bitterness alone does not make a man dangerous, Hastings. It is bitterness combined with opportunity that—" He stopped. From somewhere outside, a scream pierced the night, high, thin, and terrified. For a moment, everyone froze. Then chaos erupted. Chairs scraped back, voices rose, and we surged toward the terrace doors in a confused mass of evening dress and alarm. The scream had come from the direction of the lake. I was among the first to reach the gazebo, my military training propelling me forward while others hesitated. The lanterns along the path provided enough light to see by, and what I saw stopped me cold. Sir Marcus Ashworth lay sprawled across the gazebo bench, his white dinner jacket stark against the shadows. His eyes were open, staring sightlessly at the latticed roof, and his face was frozen in an expression of profound suffering. The features were contorted, the lips drawn back from teeth, the skin bearing a grayish pallor that spoke of something far worse than a fainting spell. A young maid stood at the gazebo entrance, her hand pressed to her mouth, her whole body trembling. It was she who had screamed. "I came to tell him dinner was served," she managed, her voice barely a whisper. I thought he was sleeping, but then I saw his face, and... "Stand back, please." Poirot's voice cut through her hysteria with calm authority. He stepped past me into the gazebo, his eyes sweeping the scene with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. He bent over Sir Marcus, pressing 2 fingers to the man's throat. After a long moment, he straightened. "He is dead," Poirot announced quietly. "And unless I am very much mistaken, he has been dead for some time." Dr. Pentworth pushed through the growing crowd, his medical bag clutched in one hand. "Let me through, for God's sake. Marcus, oh good Lord." He knelt beside the body, conducting a swift examination. When he looked up, his face was grave. "Dead," he confirmed. "I'd estimate at least an hour, perhaps more. Rigor is just beginning to set in." He lifted one of Sir Marcus's eyelids, then the other. "The pupils are fixed and dilated, and this grimace, this contortion of the features, I've seen this before." "What is it?" Lady Daphne's voice came from somewhere behind me, tight with controlled grief. "What happened to my brother?" Dr. Pentworth hesitated. His eyes met Poirot's across the body, and something passed between them. A recognition, a shared suspicion. "I cannot be certain without a proper examination," the doctor said carefully. "But the symptoms are suggestive. The contracted features, the apparent suffering, the manner of death. Lady Daphne, I must ask, did Marcus take any medication today? Anything unusual?" "Only his heart tonic," she replied. "Eleanor administers it every afternoon at 3 o'clock. It's been his routine for years." "And this evening? Did he drink anything? Eat anything?" "Champagne." It was Mrs. Crane who spoke, her voice small and frightened. "He had champagne on the terrace. We were talking, and he seemed unwell even then. Complained of headaches, blurred vision. I thought perhaps he'd had too much sun." Poirot stepped forward, his expression grave. "Madame Crane, this champagne, who gave it to him?" She shook her head. "I don't know. He had the glass when I approached him. One of the servants, I suppose." "And the glass itself, where is it now?" A murmur ran through the crowd. I realized with a chill that no one knew. The glass could be anywhere, collected by a servant, discarded, washed, destroyed. "We must find it," Poirot said. "At once, before it is too late." But even as servants scattered to search, I saw in Poirot's face that he suspected it was already too late. Someone had planned this carefully. Someone had made certain that the evidence would be difficult, perhaps impossible, to find. Inspector Graves arrived within the hour, summoned from the village by a frantic telephone call. He was a thin, sharp-featured man, with the harried expression of one who had expected a quiet evening and received something quite different. "Poisoning, you say?" He surveyed the gazebo, now illuminated by hastily erected electric lamps. "Deliberate poisoning?" "So it would appear, Inspector," Poirot replied. "The symptoms described by Dr. Pentworth are consistent with digitalis toxicity, an overdose of the medication Sir Marcus took daily for his heart condition. Then someone tampered with his medicine." Graves pulled out a notebook. Who had access to it? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Every eye turned toward Miss Eleanor Vance, who stood at the edge of the crowd, her face white as paper. I prepared his tonic this afternoon," she said, her voice barely audible. "As I always do, at 3 o'clock, precisely. But I could never." "No one is accusing you, Miss Vance," Poirot interjected gently. "We are merely establishing facts. You prepared the tonic, but where was it kept before you administered it?" "In the study, in a locked cabinet. Only Sir Marcus and I have keys." "And the medicine itself, the digitalis?" "Dr. Pentworth provides it. He brings a fresh supply each month." All eyes swiveled to the doctor, who raised his hands defensively. "I can assure you, the medication I provide is precisely measured. The correct dosage, properly prepared. If Sir Marcus received an overdose, it did not come from my dispensary." "Then someone added to it," Graves concluded. "Someone with access to the cabinet, the tonic, and digitalis. The list of suspects, I should think, is rather short." His gaze settled on Miss Vance with uncomfortable intensity. "Inspector," Poirot interjected, "before we narrow our focus too quickly, might I suggest we consider all possibilities? There was also champagne consumed this evening, and Sir Marcus complained of symptoms, headaches, blurred vision, some time before he drank it. This timing, it is significant, non?" Graves frowned. "What are you suggesting, Monsieur Poirot?" "I am suggesting, Inspector, that in matters of poison, timing is everything. And until we understand when Sir Marcus was poisoned, not merely when he died, we cannot understand by whom." The inspector regarded him with a mixture of respect and irritation. "Very well. You have a reputation, Monsieur Poirot, and I'll not dismiss your observations. But someone in this house killed Sir Marcus Ashworth, and I intend to find out who." He turned to address the assembled guests, now huddled on the terrace in various states of shock and evening dress. "No one is to leave the estate tonight," he announced. "I'll be interviewing each of you in turn, and I suggest, strongly suggest, that anyone with information come forward now before I discover it myself." No one spoke. The string quartet's instruments sat abandoned on the lower terrace, their music silenced forever. The last day of summer had ended in death. Chapter 3. Shadows Lengthen. The morning after Sir Marcus Ashworth's death dawned gray and overcast, as though the weather itself mourned the passing of summer. I rose early, having slept poorly, and found Poirot already dressed and seated in the small parlor that had been designated for the investigator's use. He looked, as always, immaculate, not a hair out of place, his mustache waxed to perfection. But there was a tightness around his eyes that spoke of a restless night. "Ah, Hastings." He gestured to the chair opposite. "You slept badly, I see. The events of last evening, they trouble your dreams?" "They trouble my waking hours more," I admitted, accepting a cup of coffee from the tray beside him. "That poor man, and the way he looked, I shan't forget that expression soon. The face of one who has suffered greatly before death," Poirot agreed. "Digitalis, it is not a kind poison. The heart, it races and stumbles. The vision blurs. There is nausea, confusion, terrible pain. And at the end, he spread his hands. The heart simply stops. You sound as though you've encountered it before." "Once or twice, mon ami. It is a favorite of the poisoner who has access to medical supplies. Easy to obtain, difficult to trace, and often mistaken for natural heart failure, especially in a victim who already takes it for a legitimate condition." Inspector Graves appeared in the doorway, looking haggard. He had been up most of the night conducting preliminary interviews, and the strain showed in the shadows beneath his eyes. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings." He nodded to each of us. "I've arranged for the formal interviews to begin this morning. Dr. Pentworth has confirmed digitalis poisoning. Massive overdose, he says. At least 5 times the therapeutic amount." Poirot's eyebrows rose. 5 times? That is not a mistake, Inspector. That is intent. Precisely my thinking. Graves consulted his notebook. "I've established a timeline. Sir Marcus took his regular medication at 3 o'clock, administered by Miss Vance. He appeared well enough through the afternoon. Guests report seeing him at the croquet lawn, the rose garden, the terrace. At approximately 4:30, he began complaining of headaches." "And the champagne?" Poirot interjected. "Served at 6 o'clock. Sir Marcus was seen drinking from his glass on the terrace. By 6:30, he had retreated to the gazebo. The maid discovered his body at approximately 7:15. but Dr. Pentworth estimates death occurred around 6:45. I frowned, working through the mathematics. So he died less than an hour after drinking the champagne. That seems rather fast for poison to take effect. Unless, Poirot said quietly, the champagne was not the source of the poison. Graves looked uncomfortable. I've considered that, but Miss Vance had exclusive access to the medication cabinet. She prepared his tonic, she administered it, and he hesitated. And? Poirot prompted. And I've learned something rather interesting about Miss Vance's relationship with Sir Marcus. The inspector's voice dropped. It seems that some years ago, perhaps 10 or 12, there was an understanding between them. Sir Marcus led her to believe that marriage was possible. Then he simply lost interest, moved on to other pursuits, left her in a position of servitude, nursing what one might call a broken heart. Who told you this? I demanded. Lady Daphne. She's known about it for years, apparently. Says the whole household knew, though no one spoke of it openly. Miss Vance continued in her position, devoted and efficient, but Lady Daphne always sensed something, a bitterness beneath the surface. Poirot was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. This is valuable information, Inspector, but I would caution against allowing it to narrow our vision too quickly. Tell me, the champagne glass that Sir Marcus drank from, has it been found? No. Graves's frustration was evident. We've searched everywhere. The servants cleared the terrace after everyone rushed to the gazebo, and in the confusion, the glass was either washed or disposed of. We have no way of testing it. How convenient, Poirot murmured. And the bottle from which the champagne was poured? Several bottles were opened that evening, impossible to determine which one served Sir Marcus. Then we must rely upon other evidence. Poirot rose, straightening his waistcoat. With your permission, Inspector, I should like to conduct my own interviews. The little gray cells, they work best when they can observe directly. Graves hesitated, then nodded. Very well, but I want to be present for the key suspects, Miss Vance and Mr. Geoffrey Ashworth. But of course, Poirot's smile was enigmatic. I would expect nothing less. Our first interview was with Jenkins, the butler, a man whose 30 years of service had granted him an encyclopedic knowledge of the household's secrets. He sat before us with the rigid dignity of his profession, his hands folded precisely in his lap. Jenkins, Poirot began gently, you have served this family for many years. You knew Sir Marcus well. As well as any servant knows his master, sir. The response was carefully neutral. And you observed him yesterday afternoon. How did he seem to you? Jenkins considered the question. He was in good spirits during the garden party, sir. Jovial, one might say. But as the afternoon progressed, he paused. I noticed he seemed fatigued. He rubbed his temples several times, and he asked me for a glass of water around 4 o'clock, said the champagne was giving him a headache. 4 o'clock. Poirot leaned forward. You are certain of the time? Quite certain, sir. I had just checked my pocket watch, as I needed to ensure the evening preparations were on schedule. And Miss Vance, did you observe her during the afternoon? Something flickered in the butler's carefully composed expression. Miss Vance performed her duties as always, sir. She brought Sir Marcus his medication at 3 o'clock. I saw her cross the lawn toward the gazebo with the tray. The gazebo? I interjected. But I thought she administered the medication in the study. Normally, yes, sir. But Sir Marcus was in the gazebo at that time, enjoying the view of the lake. Miss Vance brought the tray to him there. Poirot's eyes gleamed. So she was alone with Sir Marcus in the gazebo at 3 o'clock. For how long? Perhaps 5 minutes, sir. I observed her return to the house with the empty glass on the tray. And her demeanor? Did she seem agitated? Distressed? Jenkins hesitated, the first crack in his professional facade. If I may speak frankly, sir, please do. Miss Vance has been different lately, quieter than usual, more withdrawn. I attributed it to the arrival of Mrs. Crane. Everyone could see that Sir Marcus was quite taken with the lady. And Miss Vance? He stopped, clearly uncomfortable. Miss Vance had hoped for something more from Sir Marcus. Poirot finished gently. It was not my place to speculate, sir. Of course not, but you observed, you noticed. That is the nature of your profession. Poirot smiled. One more question, Jenkins. The champagne served yesterday evening. Who poured Sir Marcus's glass? The butler frowned. That I cannot say with certainty, sir. There were several footmen circulating with trays. Any one of them might have served Sir Marcus. Or someone else entirely. Sir? Is it possible, Jenkins, that one of the guests poured a glass and handed it to Sir Marcus directly? The butler's eyes widened slightly. I suppose it is possible, sir. I was not watching every moment. No, of course not. You had many responsibilities. Poirot rose. Thank you, Jenkins. You have been most helpful. Geoffrey Ashworth slouched in the interview chair with the defiant air of a man who expected to be accused and was determined to resist. His evening clothes from the previous night had been replaced by a rumpled suit, and the faint smell of whiskey clung to him like a reproach. I know what you think, he said before anyone could speak. The angry nephew, the argument that morning, the threats. He laughed bitterly. It's practically a script, isn't it? Straight out of a detective novel. You admit to threatening your uncle? Inspector Graves asked sharply. I said some heated things. We both did. But I didn't mean... Geoffrey ran a hand through his disheveled hair. Look, Uncle Marcus and I argued constantly. It was almost a game between us. He'd lecture me about responsibility. I'd demand money. He'd refuse. I'd storm off. We'd been doing it for years. But this time was different, Poirot observed quietly. This time, you said you would make him sorry. What did you mean by that? Geoffrey's bravado faltered. I don't know. Nothing. I was angry. He'd just told me. He stopped abruptly. Told you what, Mr. Ashworth? For a long moment, Geoffrey was silent. When he spoke, his voice was rough. He told me he was planning to marry again, Mrs. Crane. He said he intended to propose within the month. And if they had children... He swallowed hard. If they had children, his entire estate would go to them. I would receive nothing but a modest allowance. He was quite clear about that. The room fell silent. I saw Graves and Poirot exchange glances. So your uncle's marriage would have disinherited you, Graves said slowly. Effectively, yes. Geoffrey's laugh was hollow. Convenient motive, isn't it? The desperate heir, facing financial ruin, strikes before the wedding can take place. I can already hear the prosecutor's closing argument. Where were you between 3 and 7 o'clock yesterday? Graves demanded. At the party. Where else? I had champagne. I played a disastrous round of croquet. I flirted half-heartedly with Lady Thornbury's daughter. Dozens of people saw me. But can anyone account for your movements during every moment of that time? Geoffrey hesitated. I took a walk around 4 o'clock, Needed to clear my head after the argument. I went through the rose garden, around the lake, back through the orchard. Alone? Yes. For how long? Perhaps 45 minutes. An hour. Long enough, Graves observed, to tamper with your uncle's champagne, or anything else. I didn't kill him. Geoffrey's composure finally cracked. Yes, I was angry. Yes, I stood to lose everything. But he was my uncle, the closest thing to a father I've had since I was 12 years old. We fought, but His voice broke. I didn't want him dead. Poirot regarded him with an unreadable expression. Tell me, Mr. Ashworth, your uncle's medication, where was it kept? In his study, locked cabinet. Why? Did you know how to access this cabinet? Geoffrey frowned. No. Only Uncle Marcus and Miss Vance had keys. You are certain? You never saw the key? Never knew where it might be hidden? Something shifted in Geoffrey's face, a flicker of uncertainty. Uncle Marcus kept a spare key in his desk drawer. I saw him use it once, when Miss Vance was ill and couldn't bring his medication. But I never— Thank you, Mr. Ashworth. Poirot rose abruptly. That will be all for now. As Geoffrey left, looking more shaken than when he had arrived, I turned to Poirot. What was that about the spare key? You seem to know already. Poirot smiled faintly. I suspected, Hastings. A careful man like Sir Marcus would not trust his health to a single key. But now we know that others might have accessed the cabinet, not only Miss Vance. So Geoffrey could have tampered with the medication. He could have, as could anyone who knew about the spare key. Poirot's expression grew thoughtful. The question, mon ami, is not who had access. It is who knew enough to exploit it. Chapter 4. The Photograph Album. Thabaka. Morning interviews continued with Mrs. Rosalind Crane, who arrived in the parlor looking pale but composed. She wore a simple black dress. Morning already, I noted, and her dark hair was pulled back severely from her face. The effect was to make her seem younger, more vulnerable than she had appeared at the garden party. Mrs. Crane, Poirot began, his voice gentle. I understand this is a difficult time. You and Sir Marcus were close? She twisted the handkerchief in her lap. We had become friends, Monsieur Poirot. Good friends. He was kind to me after my husband's death last year. I was quite alone in the world, and Marcus, Sir Marcus, offered companionship, support. And perhaps something more than friendship was developing? A faint blush crept across her cheeks. He had spoken of marriage, nothing formal, you understand, but he hinted that he saw a future for us. I was hopeful. Were you aware that his nephew opposed this match? Geoffrey made his feelings quite clear. Her voice hardened slightly. He confronted me yesterday morning, before the party, told me I was a fortune hunter, a schemer. He said he would never allow the marriage to take place. I leaned forward. Never allow it? Those were his words? His exact words, Captain Hastings. He was quite vehement. She shuddered delicately. I confess, it frightened me. Poirot's expression remained neutral. And Miss Vance? What were your impressions of her? Mrs. Crane hesitated. A fraction too long, I thought. Miss Vance was always professional, efficient, though I sensed she did not approve of me. Did she say anything to you directly? No, nothing direct, but there were looks, small slights. Once, when I was waiting for Marcus in his study, she entered and seemed almost angry to find me there. She said— Mrs. Crane paused, her brow furrowing. She said, "This room is not for guests, Mrs. Crane. Sir Marcus prefers his private spaces to remain private. It seemed unnecessarily harsh. When was this? Perhaps a week ago. I thought nothing of it at the time, but now... She trailed off, her meaning clear. Poirot nodded slowly. Tell me, Mrs. Crane, yesterday afternoon, when you spoke with Sir Marcus on the terrace, what did you observe about his condition? He seemed unwell. I noticed it immediately. His face was flushed, then pale. He complained of seeing halos around the lantern lights, said everything looked yellow-tinged. I urged him to sit down, to call the doctor, but he dismissed my concerns, said it was merely the heat. Yellow-tinged vision. Poirot exchanged a glance with me. And this was at what time? Around 5 o'clock, I believe, perhaps a bit later. The sun was beginning to set. 2 hours after his medication was administered. Poirot stroked his mustache thoughtfully. And the champagne. Did you see who gave Sir Marcus his glass? Mrs. Crane shook her head. He already had it when I approached him. I assumed one of the servants had brought it. You did not pour it for him yourself, or hand it to him? No. Her eyes widened. Monsieur Poirot, surely you don't think... I think nothing, madame. I merely ask questions. His smile was reassuring. One final matter. You mentioned that Sir Marcus had spoken of marriage. Did anyone else know of these intentions? I'm not certain. He may have mentioned it to his sister, and Geoffrey clearly knew, or suspected. Beyond that? She spread her hands helplessly. Thank you, Mrs. Crane. You have been most helpful. After Mrs. Crane departed, Poirot sat in silence for several minutes, his eyes closed, his fingertips pressed together in an attitude of deep concentration. I knew better than to interrupt these moments of reflection. Finally, he opened his eyes. Hastings, I wish to examine Sir Marcus's study. There is something we are missing, some piece of the puzzle that eludes me. The inspector has already searched it. The inspector searches for evidence of crime. I search for evidence of character. He rose briskly. Come, mon ami, let us see what secrets the dead man's private room may reveal. Sir Marcus's study was a handsome room overlooking the south lawn, its walls lined with leather-bound books and hunting trophies. A massive oak desk dominated the space, and behind it stood the locked cabinet that held his medications. Inspector Graves had granted us access, and we entered to find the room undisturbed since the previous day's search. Poirot moved slowly around the perimeter, examining objects with the careful attention of a museum curator. Here, he murmured, pausing before a small table near the window. A photograph in a silver frame, but see how it has been placed, facing away from the room, toward the wall. I peered at the image. It showed a younger Sir Marcus, perhaps in his early 50s, standing beside a woman in a garden setting. The woman was plainly dressed, but pleasant-looking, with brown hair and a shy smile. Miss Vance, I said, recognizing her despite the years between. She looks quite different, happier. Happier, yes. And the setting. Observe it closely, Hastings. This is not Summerfield House. The architecture in the background, it is continental. French, perhaps, or Italian. A holiday photograph? So it would appear. A holiday taken together, commemorated in silver, and now turned to face the wall. Poirot's voice was soft with something that might have been pity. The history between them, it is written here for those who wish to read it. He moved to the desk, examining the drawers with methodical precision. In the third drawer, he found what he sought, a small brass key, tarnished with age. "The spare key to the medicine cabinet," he announced. "Left here, accessible to anyone who knew where to look." He crossed to the cabinet and fitted the key to the lock. It turned smoothly. Inside, the cabinet was neatly organized, bottles of various sizes, each carefully labeled in Miss Vance's precise handwriting. Poirot examined them one by one, his brow furrowing. "The digitalis," he said, holding up a small brown bottle. "See how little remains. According to Dr. Pentworth, this bottle should have contained enough medication for 2 more weeks, yet it is nearly empty. Someone used it to poison Sir Marcus. Or someone wished us to believe so." Poirot replaced the bottle carefully. "The question is, when was this extra medication removed, and by whom?" I was about to respond when something caught my eye. A leather-bound album on the lower shelf of a bookcase, partially hidden behind a row of ledgers. Its spine was unmarked, and something about its placement suggested it had been deliberately concealed. "Poirot, look at this." He took the album from me, his eyebrows rising as he opened it. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, spanning what appeared to be many years. Sir Marcus featured in most, but he was not alone. The early pages showed him with a woman I did not recognize. Elegant, fair-haired, wearing the fashions of 20 years past. "His first wife," Poirot murmured. "She died in 1920, I believe. A carriage accident." As we turned the pages, the fair-haired woman disappeared, replaced by another figure, Miss Eleanor Vance. The photographs chronicled a gradual transformation. Formal portraits gave way to casual snapshots. Professional distance dissolved into evident intimacy. In one image, Sir Marcus's arm encircled Miss Vance's waist. In another, they sat together on a terrace I recognized as Italian, their heads close in conversation. "These are not the photographs of an employer and secretary," I said slowly. "No, they are the photographs of lovers." Poirot turned another page, and his expression darkened. "But see what comes next." The final section of the album told a different story. The intimate photographs ceased abruptly, replaced by formal group shots where Miss Vance stood at the edge of the frame, barely visible. And then, "Mrs. Crane," I breathed. The last photographs featured Sir Marcus and Rosalind Crane, at parties, at dinners, walking in gardens. Their poses mirrored those earlier images of Sir Marcus with Miss Vance. The cycle was repeating itself. "He replaced her," Poirot said quietly. "After years of devotion, of promises implied if not spoken, he simply moved on, and Miss Vance was expected to remain, to witness, to serve. My God!" I felt a chill despite the morning warmth. "That's monstrous." "It is human, Hastings. Monstrous, perhaps, but human. And now we begin to understand the depth of feeling that might drive such a woman to—" He stopped, his attention caught by something tucked into the album's back cover. A letter, folded and yellowed with age, its edges worn from frequent handling. Poirot unfolded it carefully and read aloud. "My dearest Eleanor, how I miss you already, though only hours have passed since we parted at the station. These weeks in Italy have been the happiest of my life, and I look forward to many more such times together. When I return to England, we shall make our arrangement more permanent. I am tired of secrecy, tired of propriety. You deserve to be more than a shadow in my house. You deserve to be its mistress until we meet again. Your devoted Marcus." The date at the top of the letter was August 1926, 10 years ago. "He promised her marriage," I said, "in writing. And then he broke that promise, without explanation, without apology. For 10 years she has carried this letter, proof of his betrayal, testament to her humiliation. Poirot refolded the paper with infinite care. Here, mon ami, is motive enough for murder. So, Miss Vance did kill him. Poirot did not answer immediately. He replaced the album on its shelf, positioning it exactly as we had found it, and stood for a moment in contemplation. "The evidence, it points in her direction," he said at last. "The access, the motive, the means, and yet—" "Yet what?" "Yet the timing troubles me still, Hastings. The symptoms began too early. If Miss Vance poisoned the 3 o'clock tonic, the effects should not have manifested until later, not until 4:30 or 5. The dosage described by Dr. Pentworth would take longer to produce such severe symptoms. Perhaps she gave him an even larger dose than we thought. Perhaps, but Poirot did not sound convinced. Or perhaps we are meant to see Miss Vance as the obvious killer, while the true murderer hides behind her shadow." He moved toward the door, then paused, his eye caught by something on Sir Marcus's desk. A small notebook, leather-bound, filled with cramped handwriting. "His appointment diary," Poirot said, flipping through the pages. "Let us see what engagements Sir Marcus had scheduled." He found the entry for August 31st and read silently, his expression sharpening. "Hastings, come and look at this." The entry read, 3 p.m., EV, medication. 4 p.m., GA, financial discussion. 5 p.m., HP, private consultation. "EV is Miss Vance," I said. "GA must be Geoffrey Ashworth, and HP, Dr. Harold Pentworth." Poirot's eyes gleamed with sudden intensity. Sir Marcus had scheduled a private consultation with his physician at 5 o'clock, yet Dr. Pentworth made no mention of this during our interviews. Perhaps it was cancelled. Perhaps, or perhaps the good doctor is hiding something. Poirot pocketed the diary. "We must speak with Dr. Pentworth again, Hastings, and this time we must ask the questions he hopes we will not think to ask." Chapter 5. Storm clouds gather. We found Dr. Harold Pentworth in the morning room, nursing a cup of tea with the distracted air of a man whose thoughts were elsewhere. The gray clouds that had gathered overnight had thickened, and a light rain now pattered against the windows, casting the room in a melancholy half-light. "Dr. Pentworth," Poirot began, settling into the chair opposite, "I wonder if I might trouble you with a few additional questions." The doctor set down his cup, his expression guarded. "Of course, Monsieur Poirot, though I believe I've told Inspector Graves everything I know." "Undoubtedly, but there is one small matter that puzzles me." Poirot produced the appointment diary from his pocket. Sir Marcus's diary indicates that he had scheduled a private consultation with you at 5 o'clock yesterday afternoon, yet you made no mention of this meeting. The change in Pentworth's demeanor was immediate and striking. His florid complexion paled, and his hands, steady surgeon's hands I had assumed, trembled slightly as he reached for his teacup. That is to say," he cleared his throat. "The meeting did take place, yes, but it had no bearing on Marcus's death, so I saw no reason to mention it." "No bearing?" Poirot's eyebrows rose. "A private medical consultation, mere hours before your patient dies of poisoning, and you consider it irrelevant?" "It was a personal matter, confidential. Doctor, a man has been murdered. Confidentiality, I fear, must yield to the demands of justice." Poirot's voice was gentle but implacable. "What was the nature of this consultation?" Pentworth was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Marcus asked me to examine him. He was concerned about his symptoms, the headaches, the visual disturbances. He thought perhaps his heart condition was worsening. And what did you find? I found... The doctor stopped, passing a hand over his face. I found nothing wrong with his heart. The symptoms he described were not consistent with cardiac disease. They were consistent with digitalis toxicity. I felt my breath catch. You knew he had been poisoned? I suspected, but Marcus refused to believe it. He said it was impossible, that no one had access to his medication except Miss Vance, and she would never harm him. Pentworth's voice grew bitter. He trusted that woman implicitly. 16 years of service, he said. She was devoted to him. Did you share your suspicions with anyone? No. Marcus forbade it. He said if word got out that someone was trying to poison him, the scandal would ruin the family. He insisted on handling it privately, said he would speak to Miss Vance himself, clear the matter up. And did he speak with her? I don't know. I left him in the gazebo around 5:30. That was the last time I saw him alive. Poirot leaned forward, his eyes sharp. The gazebo? You examined him in the gazebo? He preferred it to the house, said he could think more clearly by the water. Pentworth's gaze dropped to his hands. I warned him, Monsieur Poirot. I told him that if he was right, if someone truly was poisoning him, he should not confront the person alone. But Marcus was always stubborn. He refused to involve the police until he had proof. And now he is dead. Yes. The word came out as a breath. And I cannot help but feel that I failed him. If I had insisted, if I had gone to Inspector Graves immediately. You would have saved his life, Poirot said quietly. But that is not a burden you alone must carry. The one who administered the poison, that person bears the true responsibility. Pentworth nodded miserably. I know, but I should have done more. Poirot was silent for a moment, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. When he spoke again, his voice was thoughtful. Tell me, doctor, the symptoms Sir Marcus described. When did he say they began? He noticed the headache first, around 3:30 or 4, then the visual disturbances, halos around lights, a yellowish tinge to everything. By the time I examined him, he was also experiencing nausea and a racing pulse. 3:30. Poirot repeated the time slowly. Half an hour after Miss Vance administered his medication. That's what troubled me. The onset was too rapid. Even a massive overdose of digitalis should take longer to produce such severe symptoms. At least 2 to 3 hours for the full effect. Pentworth frowned. Unless what, doctor? Unless he received an additional dose, one administered earlier in the day, which combined with the 3 o'clock medication to produce the accelerated reaction. The doctor's eyes widened as the implications of his own words struck him. But that would mean the poisoning began before 3 o'clock, Poirot finished. Before Miss Vance administered the tonic. I stared at him. Poirot, what are you suggesting? I am suggesting, Hastings, that we have been looking at this case from the wrong angle entirely. We have assumed that the 3 o'clock medication was the source of the poison. But what if it was merely the second dose? What if Sir Marcus was already being poisoned, slowly, deliberately, over a period of time? Pentworth shook his head. That's impossible. I provided Marcus with fresh medication every month. The dosage was carefully measured. And between your monthly visits, Who ensured that the dosage remained correct? The doctor's face went gray. Miss Vance, she decanted the medication into smaller bottles for daily use. If she had been adding extra digitalis, a little at a time, the effects would accumulate gradually, Poirot said. A slow poisoning, building over days or weeks. And then, on the day of the garden party, a larger dose to finish the job. Administered not in the 3 o'clock tonic, but earlier. Perhaps in his morning tea, perhaps in his breakfast. My God. Pentworth's voice was hollow. And I never noticed. I examined him monthly, and I never. Do not blame yourself, doctor. A slow poisoning of this nature is extremely difficult to detect, especially in a patient already taking the substance for legitimate purposes. Poirot rose, his expression grave. But now we must act quickly. If Miss Vance realizes that we have uncovered her method, she may attempt to flee or to destroy evidence. We found Inspector Graves in the library, reviewing his notes. When Poirot shared our discovery, the inspector's face hardened with grim satisfaction. I knew it was her, he said. The evidence was pointing in that direction from the beginning. Now we have confirmation. We have a theory, Poirot corrected gently. Not yet confirmation. Before we make an arrest, I would like to examine Miss Vance's quarters. If she has been poisoning Sir Marcus over time, there may be evidence, additional digitalis perhaps, or records of her actions. Graves hesitated, then nodded. Very well, but I'm coming with you. If we find what you're looking for, I want to be able to testify to its discovery. Miss Vance's room was on the 3rd floor, a small but comfortable chamber befitting her position in the household. A single window overlooked the gardens, now gray and rain-washed, and the furnishings were simple but well kept. Poirot moved through the room with methodical precision, examining drawers, shelves, and the contents of a small writing desk. I watched as he lifted books, checked behind picture frames, and even ran his fingers along the mattress seams. Anything? Graves asked impatiently. Not yet. Poirot paused before a small wardrobe, its door slightly ajar. He opened it fully, revealing a modest collection of practical dresses and sensible shoes. At the bottom, half hidden beneath a folded blanket, was a leather satchel. Poirot drew it out carefully and opened it. Inside were several items: a small bottle containing a clear liquid, a folded piece of paper, and, most damning of all, a syringe. Digitalis solution, Pentworth said, examining the bottle. Concentrated, enough here to kill several men. And the paper? I asked. Poirot unfolded it. It was a page torn from a medical text describing the symptoms and treatment of digitalis poisoning. Certain passages had been underlined in ink. Symptoms include nausea, visual disturbances, particularly yellow-tinged vision, and cardiac arrhythmia. In cases of severe overdose, death may occur within hours. Graves reached for his handcuffs. That's enough for me. I'm placing Miss Vance under arrest. Wait. Poirot's voice was sharp. There is something wrong here. Wrong? We found the poison in her room, along with research on its effects. What more do you need? That is precisely the problem, Inspector. It is too much. Poirot's eyes swept the room, his brow furrowed. Consider. Miss Vance is an intelligent woman, meticulous, careful, systematic. She has served in this household for 16 years, managing accounts, correspondence, and Sir Marcus's medical needs. Would such a woman leave evidence of her crime so carelessly hidden? A satchel barely concealed beneath a blanket where any searcher might find it? Criminals make mistakes, Graves argued, especially when they're confident they won't be suspected. But she was suspected. From the moment of Sir Marcus's death, every eye in this house turned toward her. She knew this. She must have known. And yet she made no attempt to dispose of the evidence? Poirot shook his head. "Non, Inspector. This is not the behavior of a calculating poisoner. This is the behavior of a woman who has been set up." I stared at him. "You think someone planted the evidence?" "I think it is possible, and if so, we must ask ourselves, who had access to Miss Vance's room? Who would benefit from her arrest?" Before Graves could respond, a scream echoed from somewhere below, high and thin, cutting through the rain-muted silence of the house. We rushed toward the sound, our footsteps thundering on the stairs. The scream had come from the direction of the conservatory, a glass-walled room at the rear of the house where Lady Daphne kept her prized orchid collection. We found Mrs. Rosalind Crane standing frozen in the doorway, her hand pressed to her mouth. On the floor before her lay Miss Eleanor Vance, her body twisted, her face contorted in an expression horribly reminiscent of Sir Marcus's death mask. A teacup lay shattered beside her, its contents pooled on the flagstone floor. "She was drinking tea," Mrs. Crane gasped. "She said she felt unwell and needed something to settle her nerves, and then she collapsed. She started convulsing, and I—" Pentworth pushed past her, dropping to his knees beside the stricken woman. His fingers found her throat, searching for a pulse. "She's alive," he announced. "Barely. Her pulse is erratic. The same symptoms as Sir Marcus. Someone call an ambulance immediately." As servants scrambled to obey, Poirot stood very still, his gaze moving from the unconscious woman to the shattered teacup, to the faces of those gathered around. "Another poisoning," he murmured. "But this time, the victim survives. This time, we may learn the truth." His eyes met mine, and in them I saw something that chilled me to the bone. Not surprise, not confusion, certainty. "The killer grows careless, Hastings," he said softly. "Or perhaps the killer grows desperate. Either way, the game has changed. And now, mon ami, the little gray cells, they begin to see clearly at last." Chapter 6. The gathering dusk. The ambulance arrived within the hour, and Miss Vance was transported to the village hospital under police guard. Dr. Pentworth accompanied her, his face ashen with the weight of yet another near death on his conscience. "She will survive," he told us before departing. "The dose was substantial, but we caught it in time. She should regain consciousness by this evening." Poirot received this news with a grave nod. "Then we must act quickly, Doctor. When Miss Vance awakens, she may be able to identify her attacker. But until that moment, the killer remains free and desperate." The hours that followed were tense and silent. The remaining guests had been confined to the drawing room under Jenkins's watchful eye, their faces reflecting various shades of fear, suspicion, and barely concealed hostility. Lady Daphne sat rigid in her chair, her teacup untouched before her. Geoffrey Ashworth paced before the windows, his movements jerky and agitated. Mrs. Rosalind Crane had retreated to a corner settee, her handkerchief pressed to her lips, her eyes red-rimmed from weeping. Poirot had sequestered himself in Sir Marcus's study, and I, having been firmly dismissed from his presence, could do nothing but wait. It was nearly 6 o'clock when he emerged, his expression unreadable. "Hastings," he said, "I require your assistance. Please ask Inspector Graves to assemble everyone in the drawing room at 7 o'clock. Everyone, Without exception, the family, the servants, all who were present at yesterday's garden party. "You've solved it?" I asked eagerly. "I have assembled the pieces, mon ami. Now it is time to see how they fit together." His eyes glittered with that particular light I had come to recognize, the light of certainty. "There will be a revelation this evening, and justice at last will be served." The drawing room of Summerfield House had been transformed. Heavy curtains had been drawn against the gray evening light, and lamps cast pools of amber illumination across the assembled faces. A fire crackled in the hearth despite the mild weather, lending the scene an almost theatrical atmosphere. The guests sat in a rough semicircle facing the fireplace, where Poirot had positioned himself with the commanding presence of a conductor before his orchestra. Inspector Graves stood near the door, his notebook ready, his expression alert. I counted the faces before me. Lady Daphne, rigid with aristocratic composure. Geoffrey Ashworth, slumped in his chair with the defeated air of a man expecting the worst. Mrs. Rosalind Crane, pale and trembling. Jenkins the butler, standing at attention near the servants' entrance. 2 footmen and the cook, Mrs. Patterson, huddled together like frightened sheep. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice cutting through the silence like a silver blade. "We are gathered here to unveil a truth that has lain hidden beneath layers of deception, misdirection, and carefully constructed lies. The murder of Sir Marcus Ashworth was not a crime of impulse. It was a crime of calculation, planned with precision, executed with patience, and designed to cast suspicion upon an innocent woman." He paused, allowing his words to settle over the assembly. "When I first examined this case, I made the mistake that Inspector Graves made, the mistake, I suspect, that the killer wished us all to make. I focused upon the obvious suspect, Miss Eleanor Vance, the devoted secretary with access to Sir Marcus's medication and a motive born of broken promises and bitter disappointment." Lady Daphne shifted in her chair. "Miss Vance is the obvious suspect because she is guilty, Monsieur Poirot. The evidence found in her room was planted there, Lady Daphne." Poirot's voice was gentle but firm. "Planted by someone who knew that suspicion would fall upon Miss Vance and who wished to ensure that suspicion became conviction." A murmur rippled through the room. Geoffrey Ashworth straightened in his chair, a flicker of hope crossing his features. "Consider the facts," Poirot continued. "Miss Vance administered Sir Marcus's medication at 3 o'clock, yet by 3:30, a mere half-hour later, he was already experiencing symptoms of digitalis toxicity. This is too rapid, mes amis. Even a massive overdose would require hours to produce such severe effects." "Then the poison was administered earlier," Inspector Graves interjected. "In his morning tea, perhaps, or his breakfast." "Précisément, Inspector. The poison was administered earlier, not just that morning, but over a period of days, perhaps weeks, a slow poisoning, building the digitalis levels in Sir Marcus's blood until a final fatal dose could complete the work." Poirot's gaze swept the room. "But here is the question that troubled me. If Miss Vance was the poisoner, why would she administer the final dose at 3 o'clock when she knew she would be the obvious suspect? Why not poison his evening brandy or his bedtime tisane when her access would be less conspicuous?" No one answered. The answer, of course, is that she would not. Miss Vance is not a fool. If she wished to murder Sir Marcus, she would have done so in a manner that deflected suspicion, not attracted it. Non, The 3 o'clock medication was chosen precisely because it would incriminate her, because someone else, the true killer, wished her to take the blame. Then who? Mrs. Crane's voice was barely a whisper. Who killed Marcus? Poirot turned to face her, his expression inscrutable. Let us examine the evidence, madame. The killer required 3 things: access to digitalis, knowledge of Sir Marcus's medical routine, and opportunity to administer the poison over time. Miss Vance possessed all 3, but so did others in this household. He began to pace slowly before the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back. First, let us consider Mr. Geoffrey Ashworth. He paused before the young man, who flinched under his gaze. You had motive, the inheritance that would be lost if your uncle remarried and produced new heirs. You had knowledge. You knew of the spare key to the medicine cabinet, and you had opportunity, your 45-minute walk on the afternoon of the murder, unobserved and unaccounted for. Geoffrey's face went white. I swear I didn't. No, Mr. Ashworth, you did not. Poirot's voice softened. You are guilty of many things: foolishness, extravagance, intemperate words spoken in anger. But you are not guilty of murder. The killer required patience, and patience is not a quality you possess. He moved on, pausing before Lady Daphne. Lady Daphne, you too had motive, though of a different nature. Your brother's remarriage would have diminished your position in this household. You have lived here as its mistress since his wife's death 16 years ago. A new Lady Ashworth would have displaced you. Lady Daphne's eyes blazed. I would never harm my own brother. No, Lady Daphne, I believe you would not. Your devotion to family, to the Ashworth name and legacy, is genuine. You would not risk scandal and disgrace to preserve your position. The family honor means too much to you. He continued his circuit, pausing at last before Mrs. Rosalind Crane. And then there is you, Madame Crane, the widow who arrived in the district last year, the woman who captured Sir Marcus's heart and his promise of marriage. Mrs. Crane's hands twisted in her lap. I loved Marcus. I would never hurt him. Love. Poirot repeated the word thoughtfully. Yes, let us speak of love. You loved Sir Marcus, you say, but did you love him, or did you love what he represented? Security, position, wealth. How dare you? I dare, madame, because I have examined the facts, and the facts tell a most interesting story. Poirot reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded document. This is a copy of Sir Marcus's will, obtained this afternoon with Inspector Graves's assistance. Under its terms, Sir Marcus's estate was to be divided between his nephew Geoffrey and his sister Lady Daphne, with a generous bequest to Miss Vance in recognition of her years of service. He paused, allowing the information to settle. But there is a codicil, Madame Crane, a recent codicil, added just 2 weeks ago. Under its terms, if Sir Marcus died before remarrying, a substantial portion of his estate, some £30,000, would go to Mrs. Rosalind Crane in recognition of our understanding and my hopes for our future together. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Mrs. Crane's face had gone very still. £30,000, Poirot repeated. A fortune, madame, enough to live comfortably for the rest of your days. But only if Sir Marcus died before the wedding, while the codicil remained in effect. Once married, a new will would supersede the old, and your inheritance would depend upon your husband's continued goodwill. That's circumstantial, Mrs. Crane stammered. It proves nothing. By itself, perhaps not, but consider the timing, madame. You arrived in this district 1 year ago, a widow of modest means. Within months, you had captured the attention of the wealthiest man in the county. Within weeks of meeting him, you had secured a promise of marriage and a place in his will. Poirot's voice hardened almost imperceptibly. And now let us speak of the poisoning itself. The killer required access to digitalis, but you, madame, had no such access. Or did you? He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small brown bottle. This bottle was found in your luggage this afternoon, hidden within a compartment of your traveling case. It contains a concentrated solution of digitalis, identical to the solution found in Miss Vance's room. Mrs. Crane rose from her seat, her face contorted with sudden fury. You searched my belongings? How dare you? I demand— You demand nothing, madame. Poirot's voice was ice. You are in no position to make demands. The bottle in your case contains your fingerprints, and only your fingerprints. The bottle, planted in Miss Vance's room, was wiped clean. The room had gone utterly silent. Mrs. Crane stood frozen, her chest heaving, her eyes darting toward the door. Do not attempt to flee, madame. Inspector Graves has stationed men at every exit. Poirot's gaze held her like a pin through a butterfly. The game is finished. Let us now speak the truth. For a long moment, Mrs. Crane said nothing. Then, slowly, her shoulders sagged. The mask of innocent grief crumbled away, replaced by something cold and calculating. How did you know? Her voice was flat, emotionless. Several things, madame. First, the timing of the symptoms. You told us that Sir Marcus complained of yellow-tinged vision at 5 o'clock. But Dr. Pentworth's examination occurred at 5:30, and Marcus had been experiencing symptoms for at least an hour before that. You lied about the timing, madame, because you needed to suggest that the champagne, served at 6, might have been the source of the poison. You wished to create confusion about the method. Mrs. Crane's lips pressed into a thin line. Second, the poisoning of Miss Vance. When we discovered the evidence in her room, I knew it had been planted. But the question remained. By whom? Who had access to her quarters, and who would benefit from her arrest? He paused, letting the question hang in the air. You discovered Miss Vance in the conservatory, madam. You claimed she had made her own tea, but the servants confirmed that no tea had been ordered, and the teapot from which her cup was poured bore traces of digitalis. Someone prepared that tea specifically to poison Miss Vance. Someone who wished to silence her before she could speak. She would have told you everything, Mrs. Crane spat. She suspected me. I could see it in her eyes. That morning, after the search of her room, she looked at me and said, You would know about heartbreak, wouldn't you, Mrs. Crane? About loving someone who doesn't love you back. She knew. She had guessed. And so you tried to kill her. I had no choice. The words tore from her throat. Everything was falling apart. The evidence was supposed to condemn her, but you kept asking questions, picking at the details. I could see you weren't convinced. And Sir Marcus? Poirot's voice was quiet. Tell us how you killed him. Mrs. Crane laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. It was so easy, easier than I ever imagined. He was a vain man, Monsieur Poirot, vain and foolish. He invited me to his study for private conversations. He showed me where he kept his medication, his spare keys, his precious secrets. He thought he was impressing me with his trust. She began to pace, her movements agitated. I started adding digitalis to his morning tea 3 weeks ago. Just a little at first, enough to make him feel unwell, but not enough to arouse suspicion. I told him he was working too hard, that he needed rest. He believed me. He believed everything I told him. And on the day of the garden party, I added a larger dose to his tea that morning. By afternoon, he was already symptomatic, but he attributed it to the heat, the excitement. When Miss Vance gave him his regular medication at 3, it pushed the levels in his blood past the point of no return. She smiled, a terrible, triumphant smile, and everyone blamed her, just as I intended. "The champagne glass," Poirot said. "You disposed of it?" I told one of the footmen to clear the terrace. He collected the glass without knowing its significance. By the time anyone thought to look for it, it had been washed and put away with all the others. And the evidence in Miss Vance's room? Planted while everyone was at dinner. The servants were busy. The family was occupied. It took less than 5 minutes. Inspector Graves stepped forward, his handcuffs ready. "Mrs. Rosalind Crane, I am arresting you for the murder of Sir Marcus Ashworth and the attempted murder of Miss Eleanor Vance." As he read the formal charges, Mrs. Crane's composure finally cracked. Tears streamed down her face. Not tears of remorse, I thought, but tears of fury and frustration. "He promised me everything," she hissed as Graves led her toward the door. "A new life, security, a position in society." And then he started talking about postponing the wedding, about waiting another year. I couldn't wait another year. I couldn't risk him changing his mind the way he changed it about her. She jerked her head toward the empty space where Miss Vance might have stood. I refuse to become another Eleanor Vance, devoted and discarded. I refuse. The door closed behind her, and silence descended upon the room. Lady Daphne was the first to speak. "My God," she whispered. "We invited that woman into our home. We trusted her." Geoffrey slumped in his chair, his face gray. "Uncle Marcus trusted her most of all, and she exploited that trust," Poirot said quietly. "It is the cruelest form of betrayal, Monsieur Ashworth, and the most difficult to guard against." He moved toward the window, drawing back the curtain to reveal the rain-washed garden beyond. Somewhere in the distance, the church clock began to toll the hour. There is a lesson here, mes amis, a lesson about the nature of love and its corruptions. Sir Marcus sought companionship and found a predator. Mrs. Crane sought security and became a murderer. And Miss Vance... He paused, his voice softening. Miss Vance loved truly and was rewarded with years of silent suffering. Of the 3, she alone is innocent, and she alone was made to bear the blame. "Will she recover?" Lady Daphne asked. Dr. Pentworth believes so. The dose was substantial, but she is strong. Poirot turned from the window. "When she wakes, she will learn that her name has been cleared, and that the man she loved for 16 years was not worthy of that devotion. I do not know which truth will be more painful for her to bear." Jenkins cleared his throat. "If I may, sir, Miss Vance knew. I believe she always knew what Sir Marcus was, but she loved him anyway." "Yes," Poirot said softly. "That is perhaps the saddest truth of all. The heart, it does not always choose wisely, and sometimes it is the unwise choices that bind us most tightly." Chapter 7. September Morning. The first day of September dawned clear and bright, as though nature herself wished to mark the turning of the page. The rain had passed in the night, leaving the gardens of Summerfield. House washed clean and glittering with dew. The roses, I noted, had begun to fade, their petals scattered across the lawn like confetti after a wedding that would never be. Poirot and I took breakfast on the terrace, a liberty granted by Lady Daphne, who had proven surprisingly gracious in the aftermath of the tragedy. She had aged visibly in the past 2 days, her aristocratic features drawn with grief and exhaustion, but her spine remained unbowed. "You will stay for the funeral, Monsieur Poirot?" she had asked the previous evening. "Alas, Lady Daphne, I fear I cannot. There are matters in London that require my attention." He had taken her hand with surprising gentleness. "But I leave you with my deepest sympathies and my assurance that justice has been served." Now, as I spread marmalade on my toast, I watched Poirot gaze across the gardens with an expression I could not quite read. Melancholy, perhaps, or merely contemplation. "You're very quiet this morning," I observed. "I am thinking, Hastings. It is what I do." "About the case?" "About many things." He lifted his coffee cup. Proper coffee at last, not the weak English tea he had been forced to endure, and took a measured sip. "About Sir Marcus, who sought love and found death. About Mrs. Crane, who sought security and found the gallows. About Miss Vance, who sought nothing but to serve, and was rewarded with suspicion and poison. Miss Vance will recover, at least. Dr. Pentworth telephoned this morning. She's awake and asking questions." "Ah." Poirot nodded slowly. "That is good news. She is a woman of strength, that one. She will need it in the days to come." I hesitated, then asked the question that had been troubling me since the previous evening's revelation. "Poirot, when did you know? When did you realize it was Mrs. Crane?" He set down his cup, his fingers tracing the rim with absent precision. "I suspected from the moment I learned of the timing, Hastings, the symptoms that began too early, the champagne that was served too late, the pieces, they did not fit the pattern of Miss Vance's guilt. But you didn't accuse Mrs. Crane immediately." "No, suspicion is not proof. I needed evidence, and I needed to understand the method." He paused, his mustache twitching. The breakthrough came when I examined Sir Marcus's appointment diary. He had scheduled a private consultation with Dr. Pentworth at 5 o'clock, a consultation that the good doctor initially concealed. Why? Because Sir Marcus had suspected he was being poisoned. He knew the symptoms were wrong, and he had begun to investigate. But he suspected Miss Vance. He suspected someone with access to his medication. Miss Vance was the obvious choice, but Sir Marcus was not a stupid man. He would have confronted her, demanded answers, and if she had been innocent, as she was, he would have looked elsewhere. To Mrs. Crane. Précisément. I believe Sir Marcus was beginning to suspect the truth. That is why he retreated to the gazebo that afternoon, not merely to rest, but to think, to consider the impossible possibility that the woman he intended to marry was slowly killing him. A chill passed through me, despite the morning warmth, and she knew he was suspicious. She knew. That is why she acted when she did. The garden party provided cover, dozens of guests, circulating servants, confusion and distraction. She added a larger dose to his morning tea, knowing that the combination with his regular medication would prove fatal, and she arranged for Miss Vance to take the blame. It's monstrous. It is human, Hastings. Poirot's voice was soft. Monstrous, yes, but human. Mrs. Crane was not born a killer. She was made one by circumstance and desperation and the terrible mathematics of survival. She saw an opportunity and seized it. She calculated the risks and found them acceptable. She murdered a man who trusted her, and she felt no remorse, only frustration when her plan began to unravel. I shook my head. I cannot understand it. I cannot understand how anyone could be so cold. That is because you have a good heart, mon ami. You see the world as it should be, not as it is. Poirot smiled. A small, sad smile. It is one of your most admirable qualities, and one of your most dangerous. We sat in silence for a moment, watching a gardener rake the fallen petals from the lawn. The church bells began to toll in the distance, not a funeral toll, but the ordinary marking of the hour. Life, it seemed, was already moving on. "What will happen to the estate?" I asked. "It will pass to Geoffrey Ashworth, as Sir Marcus intended. The codicil in Mrs. Crane's favor is void, of course. One cannot inherit from a victim one has murdered." Poirot's eyes glinted with something like satisfaction. "Young Geoffrey will receive his inheritance after all. Let us hope he has learned wisdom from this tragedy." "And Miss Vance?" "She will receive her bequest as well, a comfortable sum, enough to secure her independence. Lady Daphne has offered her a position here, should she wish to remain, but I suspect she will not." "No," I agreed. "Too many memories. Too many. Ghosts?" Poirot rose, brushing an invisible speck from his immaculate sleeve. "Come, Hastings. The car will be here soon. London awaits, and with it, new puzzles to occupy the little gray cells." I followed him into the house, pausing at the threshold to look back at the gardens one last time. The gazebo stood empty by the lake, its white lattice gleaming in the morning light. It looked peaceful now, almost innocent, as though it had never witnessed the death of a man betrayed by love. "Poirot," I said as we crossed the entrance hall, "do you believe in justice? True justice, I mean, not merely the legal kind?" He paused, considering the question with the gravity it deserved. "I believe, Hastings, that the universe has a way of balancing its accounts. Mrs. Crane sought to escape poverty through murder. Instead, she will face the hangman's noose. Sir Marcus sought to replace one woman's devotion with another's beauty. Instead, he found death at the hands of the woman he chose. And Miss Vance?" He smiled gently. "Miss Vance, who asked for nothing, will receive freedom. Freedom from a man who did not deserve her loyalty. Freedom to build a new life, unshackled from the past." "That seems almost too neat." "Justice often is, mon ami. It is only injustice that is messy." He took his hat from the stand and settled it upon his head with characteristic precision. "Now come. The train will not wait, and Hercule Poirot does not miss trains." As our car wound down the gravel drive, I looked back at Summerfield House one final time. The sun had fully risen now, burning away the last traces of morning mist. The gardens blazed with late summer color, defiant against the coming autumn. The last day of summer was over, but somewhere, I knew, new seasons were beginning. And so concludes our tale of love and betrayal, of promises broken and justice served. Sir Marcus Ashworth lies in his grave, mourned by some and unmourned by others. Mrs. Rosalind Crane awaits her fate in a prison cell, her dreams of wealth and security turned to ashes. And Miss Eleanor Vance, faithful, devoted, betrayed, begins the slow work of rebuilding a life. For Hercule Poirot, there will be other mysteries, other puzzles to challenge the little gray cells. But this case, I think, will linger in his memory. Not for its complexity. There have been more intricate crimes. Not for its danger. There have been more perilous investigations. But for its lesson about the human heart and the terrible things we do in the name of love. Until next time, dear listeners, may your summers be long, your autumns gentle, and your hearts always true.